Good evening, you're watching The Big Question. I'm Sanjana. India and the United States are staring at a critical deadline. With just days left before the tariff pause expires, trade negotiators in Washington are working overtime. The stakes? A $500 billion trade ambition, thousands of livelihoods, and the future of India's export engine. India is demanding zero tariffs on labor-intensive products, textiles, leather, handicrafts, arguing that without them, doubling exports will remain a pipe dream. The US, meanwhile, is proposing a 10% surcharge over MFN duties, pushing aggressively for access to Indian markets for rice, for dairy, poultry, and GM soy. India fears that 70 crore rural livelihoods could be jeopardized by cheap imports backed by massive American subsidies. And in an unprecedented move, India has also pitched for a social security agreement to protect its professionals, something only 22 countries have signed with India so far. While many deals may offer limited tariff cuts on almonds and spirits, the larger issues of sectoral tariffs on steel, on aluminium and autos, all of those remain frozen. So tonight we ask, what will it take to break the deadlock, and can India secure a trade pact that protects both its farmers and its future? Let's find out. Let me quickly introduce my expert panel this evening. Pramod Bhasin, Chairman, ICR, a business leader turned policy voice who has tracked India's trade evolution for decades. He'll help us decode whether India's red lines are realistic. A. Sekhar, National President of the Indo-American Chamber of Commerce, representing the pulse of businesses on both sides. He's going to share whether the stalemate is hurting growth. We're also going to be joined by Ambassador Meera Shankar, the former Indian envoy to the US and one of India's most respected diplomats, to bring perspective on whether politics or policy is going to drive this final leg. So let's come to the stalemate. Why talks have stalled? India's team has extended their stay in Washington. Negotiations are stuck over agriculture, tariffs, now social security. US wants guaranteed access to Indian farm markets. India says livelihoods are at stake. Pramod sir, is this just tactical brinkmanship, or are we looking at a deeper clash of economic visions?
Good evening. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Glad to have you.
Honestly, I think it's tactical negotiations. Trump has shown all the way that what he's doing through these volatile negotiations that he goes through by announcing 90-day halts and then huge tariffs and then coming back, he's just using this to bring everybody to the table, in my view. He's done this consistently, by the way, in his business career. He's demonstrated that he uses something that is called the anchoring effect, whereby if he wants 100 for something, for some item, he asks for 1,000, and if he gets 150, he's eventually the winner. So I think he's bringing a lot of people to the table with a lot of major statements. Most of them, I think we should ignore, personally, because I think we've seen lots of these happening. And I think there's lots of room for us to bridge this gap. We have a major trade deficit. I mean, the US has a major trade deficit with us, which they want to reduce. It's a $45 billion trade surplus that India enjoys with them. But, you know, at the same time, what's happening nowadays is interesting, that there's going to be a big vacuum left by China, because China, the tariffs on China is going to be higher. There are many areas in which they will not be able to produce the goods at the price that they need to sell to the US. And that is going to leave a gap for us, certainly for the more labor-intensive products that you talked about, textiles, leather, other things like that. And there are areas where we can reduce tariffs. There are areas like whiskey and wine and walnuts, etc., where we could reduce tariffs to allow more American imports without damaging local producers. So, and then we have a need to buy oil. We buy it from all over the world. We can certainly buy more from the US. We can certainly look to give them greater access to some of our markets, maybe not dairy, but certainly in agriculture. There are many other areas where we could give them access. I'm actually glad that India is holding its fort. It's holding its place firm and drawing a line in the sand, because we need to do that, because otherwise we'll be chucked around by the volatility that has been created. But at the same time, I think there will be a time when push will come to shove, and we will have to agree to a certain amount of give way. But I don't think this is a lost cause at all. I think India sits in a fairly advantageous position at this time, which, if we use it well, can really help us accelerate our own exports to America for the gap that will be left behind by China. So it's very strategic at this point in time, that the game that we could play ourselves.
So I'm going to scratch the surface for assuming that there is the anchoring effect in play, and of course assuming that our negotiators are well aware of it. Pramod sir, would you say India's push for zero tariffs on labor-intensive exports, would you say it's realistic, especially when the US is hardening its stance?
I don't think so. I'm not sure it is. I suspect that if he's going to maintain a 10% tariff across the board for most countries, that he will have a hard time relinquishing that. But I do think that if we agree to that and reduce some of our own tariffs that we have high, I wonder how much of a damage that will cause. The social security issue, by the way, which I didn't touch on, is an important one. We have a lot of professionals who work in the US, who go back and forth, who are delivering great services. By the way, as you know, none of this trade surplus deficit talk includes anything on services, fortunately. But that's an important element of cost that we incur, which we never recover, and which benefits the US coffers. So I think it's worth pursuing. So
we'll get into that.
Yeah, please.
We'll get into that. Ambassador Meera, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to NDTV Profit. Diplomatically, is there any room for a face-saving compromise, or do you think that both sides have boxed themselves in?
Well, I think that both sides will strive for some kind of face-saving compromise because President Trump wants to show that he can succeed. And at the moment, he's apart from a mini deal with the UK, which is kind of a framework agreement. He's still in negotiation with all other partners, Canada, EU, Mexico, and Vietnam. So no deals as yet, though at the moment his negotiating stance is basically a stick. There are no carrots for India at all in the stance that the US has adopted at present. That is, I hold the stick. If you open up, I won't use it. So basically, I'm threatening additional tariffs. If you open up and give me concessions across the board, then I won't use it and impose those tariffs, except the universal tariff of 10%. The US claims it has no fast-track negotiating authority from Congress, and therefore they are not in a position to give tariffs below MFN. And if they go to Congress, you see, fast-track negotiating authority gives an up and down vote. People can say yes or no. But if they don't have it, then every congressman can move amendments or oppose it. And so it makes the task of concluding agreements with international partners almost impossible. Now, we don't know if Trump is going to seek that fast-track amendment, because at the moment, he's basically using trade as a policy to open up other countries without conceding anything in return. So with China, it's a mini deal, for the moment, it's kind of what they've struck is temporary, and there are 90 days for them to try to finalize it. But this reduces US tariffs, total US tariffs, to about 35%, while China imposes 10% tariffs on the US. So it's asymmetrical. China is confident that through subsidizing or manipulating their currency to lower value, they might be able to live with 35%. So people in India who are very confident that we can fill the space if China has higher tariffs, I think you need to take a realistic look at this. There's an opportunity. India doesn't have the manufacturing capability as yet on scale, and even Bangladesh and Vietnam actually outsell us on all labor-intensive products. So, and they have a duty advantage as well. So Bangladesh has zero duties as a least developed country. And I don't know about Vietnam, but certainly Bangladesh has an advantage. So this is something that India should pursue. And I think India has to be very clear that, you know, it has to be a deal which has mutual benefits.
Sure,
There are
sure.
areas where we can certainly open up to the US, buy more energy, buy more aeroplanes. There are possibilities in gas as well. There are many possibilities, defense equipment, technology from the US. But at the same time, there are areas for India which are no-go, you know, like wheat or rice. These are areas where India would find, or dairy, where India would find it very, very difficult to open up. There are things like walnuts or pistachios other like soybean oil, since we import oil. These are things we can buy. But to open up agriculture across the board, I think that is something which any government would find politically very, very difficult or almost impossible.
Absolutely.
So I think we have to hold firm, but also be willing to show flexibility if the US shows flexibility.
Sure.
It can't be a rollover.
Okay, so let me then bring in a word from A. Sekhar, because businesses are caught in limbo. What are your members telling you about the uncertainty?
Oh, well, Indo-American Chamber has been about 56 years, and, you know, we have predominantly members from the MSME community, and with a trade of $210 billion between us, which is to grow. See, we also have certain advantages, like, you know, we have certain high engineering exports, which are pretty good about the quality and the things what we are doing. And one more thing is that we are also pretty investing fairly well into the American enterprise to work on, so that to help them. So they do understand that our value of our knowledge, what we are able to bring in there to the table, is what is very important. So that's been one of those points which our team is trying to take advantage of. And definitely, as the rest of my panelists said, the sticky figures are something, they are little also political, like especially with respect to agricultural as well as dairy. These are two of those where, you know, there's a predominantly, we have a huge workforce which is to be taken care. And we may agree a few things, like, you know, except the genetically modified ones, which are not absolutely a no-no, because, you know, that's something which would put us back into serious trouble, which I think sure we are not going to agree to them. But on the a deficit front can be easily resolved by our energy requirements and purchases. That would not be a great issue. But we still feel that, I mean, these negotiations would continue. I mean, it's not that, you know, we may have an interim deal to happen. See, we have seen why supply chain resilience is something which is very, very vital. And so that the COVID explained us, and US is very wary about it. You know, that, you know, they can't be just dependent on China alone. And they need, when you need something to have a split over to get you some high quality precision engineered products, then India would be one of the best.
India is your guy.
Yeah, India is a guy for it, and I think we are working towards that. Yeah, there are broader sectors which you need to have a give and take. We are talking about it, and US also understands that, you know, where is a point of inflection which they'll have to sort of agree. It's very important. Our team, the government team which has gone there, is pretty mature enough, and they know that to read the pulse, they work on it, and they seem to be doing a pretty good job out there. And we are pretty good. We have submitted our papers, like, you know, we have been giving a lot of work on it. And in fact, we recently did, you know, in US is looking at we as a partnering for like high technology, like semicon manufacturing, quantum computing, and, you know, all those areas. So from IACC, we did a series of roundtable discussions with the industry, the academia, as well as the U.S. consulate and us with our team. So we were able to submit a paper to our government to say that these are all points which you should take it up with them, which should be part of their deal when you're going for the trade negotiation. And this has been pretty receptive also there.
Okay.
So we are hopeful of that,
Okay. So for the first time, India is also pitching for something beyond tariffs. That's protection for its professionals, and what we were discussing at the start, a social security deal and why it matters. India wants a social security agreement similar to what it has with the UK. This would save professionals from double contributions and improve probability of benefits. Ambassador, do you see the US agreeing to this given its own domestic politics?
I don't, because it's something we've been pursuing for a very, very long time, and the US has refused to discuss it all these years, primarily saying that you do not have a social security system which covers the bulk of your population on par with that of the US. So that has been the argument given. And at the moment, I think the deficit in the US is scheduled to grow. The bill, this big, beautiful bill which President Trump has presented, looks at cutting US funds for US programs like Medicaid and Social Security. So this is going to be quite tough in itself. I don't think that there would be willingness to actually discuss a Social Security agreement with India, which basically means avoiding double taxation. That is, if they are paying Social Security in India, then they shouldn't be paying it in the US, because then they can't take it back with them when they go. That is something which I really don't see this administration making a move in that direction, but it's something which we need to keep putting on the table and pressing for, because it puts our professionals at a disadvantage, since they have to contribute and can't derive the benefit of that contribution when they come back to India.
Absolutely. Pramod, so for India's services sector, is this, would you say, as big as tariff cuts on goods exports?
No, I wouldn't. I think for our services sector, just let me back up. You're talking about the Social Security issue,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
Yeah, no, it isn't. As the ambassador says, this is an ongoing discussion we've been having with the US for 15, 20 years. It is somewhat unfair, but the fact is, if they change these rules for us, then they'll have to change them for all the people who come to America from a variety of countries to work, which would be hard. It is true that our employees don't get the benefit of Social Security from the US once they come home. But, to be honest with you, I think we do get the benefit of many other things, and we do get the benefit of that Social Security and healthcare and other benefits while we're there in the US. So I don't see them doing it, but I absolutely agree with our ambassador that keep it as a negotiating point. It's a big one. It's a lot of money that we contribute to the US coffers. Keep it as a negotiating point and then work around it to see what else we can get. I do think the one area, if I may suggest, is different, is the manufacturing point about do we have the capacity or not. I agree we need more capacity, but the fact is that if the China leaves a big hole, then some of our factories will become more competitive and be able to compete. Even currently, and some of that capacity can be added on. And I think that's an advantage we can take. But on the services side, I don't know how loudly I should say this, but we've all, through NASCOM and the IT businesses that I represent also, we've all asked for this for a long time. I don't know that any of us have been waiting with bated breath for it to come through.
Okay, assuming that, and one can hope, even if it is a negotiating tactic or even if it comes through, Sekhar, how much would this improve India's attractiveness as an outsourcing hub?
You see, it does definitely affect but the question is still, as far as the services as an outsourcing one, where else would you get this type of volume of people to do these services?
And talent.
Understand, yes. So I think they will have to look at us if they want to be also competitive to get their jobs done there. It will continue, and see the knowledge, the talent potential what we have, and the volume of talent potential what we have is something amazing. Which with the demography what I currently have, which is at a big advantage. They do understand that. And yeah, these are points which we would use because these are like non-tariff barriers, like which is happening. So those are also ones which will take them to see that we get a better deal, to see they both of us understand that we definitely need to have more trade happening between these two countries, and that's what we are catalyzing. And both governments understand that, so they'll have to have a leeway somewhere to get this done.
Okay, but while professionals, are watching closely, I think the elephant in the room, and of course on the negotiating table, is the biggest flashpoint that remains is the farm sector. The unmovable red line is agriculture. US is pushing for access to rice, for dairy, poultry, GM soy. India fearing price crashes, import surges, unfair competition. We're looking at 70 crore rural livelihoods that could be impacted. Pramod sir, are India's fears overstated, or do subsidies really make a level playing field impossible?
I think our fears are real. I think there's way too much employment. Unfortunately, the inefficiency of our agricultural sector does make us very vulnerable to cheap imports that may come through, particularly from the US. Their capacity to export is very substantive, far greater than our ability here to do anything about it. So I think these are real issues. Having said that, there are pockets and areas within that we can look at very carefully without harming local producers. We've talked about that. Perhaps it's whiskey, perhaps it's wine, perhaps it's walnuts. There are many other areas which I'm sure the experts know. Ashok Gulati, who works for us at ICRIER, has written extensively on this subject in the last week or 10 days. But we cannot afford really to open up the dairy sector and other sectors to an onslaught of imports from the US, which are to some extent not subsidized, but certainly are going to be driven by much higher ability to manufacture and capacity to scale, and therefore at price points which could be extremely damaging to us. So I think we've got to be very careful and very clear that that is an area we can't defend. I'll go back to one of the points you were making about professional services, if I may. The world will come to India. I don't think this is going to be impacting our ability to get more business done. All these GCCs that are coming here are not going to stop. They have nowhere else to go. It's very important we realize that. Of course, they could do more as AI and other things come in. They may do more domestically. They may insource a lot. But as you're seeing, the influx of GCCs into India is very large, and it's driven by American companies in large part. And they're the ones who will also stand up for making sure that that playing field doesn't change dramatically. But on agriculture, we have to be very careful as to what we give up and offset it with things that matters to the US. I think the point about defense, high tech, electronics, etc., is very valid. That's where we should direct our efforts rather than saying send us more agricultural products if we can.
Okay, and beyond agriculture, India's industrial exports are also stuck in limbo. India wants lower or zero tariffs on textiles, auto parts, toys. The US is proposing a 10% surcharge over MFN duties. Without relief, India then risks losing competitiveness to Vietnam and Bangladesh. I'm cognizant that we are also running short on time. So, Ambassador, what precedent does then this set for future FTAs with the EU or ASEAN?
Look, whatever we do with the US will be a template also for what we do with the EU and with ASEAN, where we are updating our existing FTA. So we have to be quite careful in terms of weighing the sectors where we have flexibility and the sectors where we have to dig our heels in. India doesn't have commercial farming on a large scale. They're basically subsistence farmers with 2.5 acres. So the economies of scale that these huge American mega corporations are able to bring to the table is something which they cannot compete with. And since 50% of Indian livelihoods, the population, depends on this kind of subsistence farming, to really open up could cause widespread social and political turmoil in India if it increases our agricultural vulnerability. So it's something we have to be cautious about. But certainly, as I said, there are areas where we need the US and the US needs us. And the soft point is going to be how both countries can reach these points simultaneously and get congruence.
Absolutely. Thank you so much to all of my panelists that are joining me this evening for all of your insight, perspective and analysis. It remains to be seen now how these discussions move forward. But for years, like we have been saying, India and the US have talked about unlocking the full potential of a $500 billion trade relationship. But this evening's debate makes one thing clear. Ambition alone won't bridge the gap between protecting farmers at home and opening markets abroad. The choices ahead aren't just about tariffs and quotas, they're about livelihoods, competitiveness, and whether India can secure a fair deal without compromising its red lines. As negotiators extend their stay in Washington, the question isn't just if a breakthrough is possible, but whether either side is ready to make the trade-offs that history demands. We'll be here to track every concession, every standoff, and every opportunity as this pivotal chapter in India's economic story unfolds. Thank you for watching The Big Question.